What is going on, Game Plan T1D community? Got a great episode for you today with Ryan Reed. Before I introduce our guest today, I just wanted to make a quick little public service announcement. Coming up, this will be our 5th episode. We hope you guys are enjoying the content that we're putting out there. But if not, let us know. Hit us up on either social media, or you can send us an email through our site, www.gameplant1d.com, and just let us know, is there an athlete that you want to hear their story? Do you want to publicize your own story? We can make that happen. Is there an area regarding a certain athlete's life that you want to hear more about? Let us know, and we will do our best to make that happen. For today's episode, I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to sit down with Ryan Reed. Ryan is a type 1 diabetic, diagnosed at age 19, and went on to do some amazing things on the racetrack. He's currently a driver in the NASCAR Xfinity Series and is just crushing it. His racing career began way back at the age of 4. He grew up around racing with his dad being involved in NASCAR and being a race car driver himself. So I was really looking forward to hear Ryan's story. And also, the other amazing thing that Ryan is doing is he has his own non-for-profit, Ryan's Mission. That's another thing that we talked about in this episode, just giving back to the diabetic community, which is just so refreshing to see him doing at such a young age. So without any further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Ryan Reed. Welcome to the Game Plan T1D Podcast. Ryan, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Just hanging out in my home in North Carolina and middle of the week. So just kind of getting ready for the next race. It's this weekend. Busy time in the middle of the summer. It's kind of when we're in full swing. So just enjoying the middle of the race season.
Absolutely. So how is this season going? I took a look at your race schedule, and it, like you said, it's pretty hectic. So how is the season going so far? And if you don't mind, you could maybe talk about your upcoming schedule and maybe sort of what a normal week of racing looks like.
Yeah. So, but to answer your question about how the season's going, I feel like, our season's so long, so we go through, obviously a great season is when everything goes great and there's no problems all year long, but that's really rare. So I feel like we've had, great runs and we've had not so great runs. So I felt like in the front part of the season, we struggled a lot with consistency and being able to put together good finishes week in and week out and kind of closing out races where we should finish. Over about the last 6 weeks, I feel like we really rebounded nicely. We've been able to finish in the top 10 really consistently and really build our gap to the cutoff line in our playoffs, which to some of those listening, racing is a unique sport. And so we do have a playoff system that's been about 3 or 4 years old, but I think it's been awesome for the drivers and for the fans. And so we're safely inside the playoffs. We have 3 or 4 races left until our playoffs start. Right now it's just about continuing that consistency that we've built over the last month or so and really grinding it out until the playoffs start. And then obviously once you get into the playoffs, it's like, a whole another level, and I think that it's funny because in sports we see a lot of people talk about playoffs, and every weekend, like at the racetrack, everyone who touches the race car gives 100%. But once the playoffs start, man, it's a whole nother level, and you can't really describe why. Just the intensity ramps up, your team elevates, everyone elevates, and so it's pretty cool to see, and it's a special time of year.
It's funny. For me growing up, it was always football was my background, so racing to me is really foreign, but definitely overlap there between the excitement and the energy behind kind of that playoff run. So talk a little bit about how the travel factors in. It sounds like on a week-to-week basis, the whole team is pretty busy preparing for these different venues. Do those changes in the racetracks and the venues, does that play into how you prepare for the different races?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's probably the most unique thing about our sport is that the change in venue, it makes it impossible to practice. It's not where we can go run drills and we can go actually simulate on-track stuff with like a test track or something. The only way if you were to go actually do meaningful, having a meaningful practice like you would in other sports is if you could go to that racetrack and actually practice, because every track is so much different, whether you're talking about just the general shape of it, the banking, the surface, how old the surface is plays a major factor. I mean, even down to what it was like when they poured the asphalt or the concrete, like all that stuff plays such a vital role to how you set up the race car and how you drive it. So the only way we really can practice is with simulators, and Ford, all the major manufacturers have a state-of-the-art simulator that it's really, I'll be on it tomorrow, getting ready, doing some pre-race kind of test stuff, but it's obviously not the real thing. So when I wrecked in the simulator, we hit a reset button. There's no reset button in real life, obviously, but so that's kind of how we prepare, which I think has changed a lot over the last 5 to 10 years. And then, like you said, the travel is definitely grueling. We're on a plane every weekend, headed somewhere, and so this weekend we're headed up to Wisconsin, and we're going to race in Road America, which we have the 4 road courses a year where we actually make left and right turns. I think when people think of NASCAR, obviously it's the left turn thing, and we do make our fair amount of left turns. But 4 races a year, we make left and right turns. So this is going to be a lot of fun. Like I said, week in and week out, we're getting on an airplane traveling somewhere. And that's tough. I mean, so I think for me, being regimented and having a good consistent schedule throughout the week and knowing what I got going on and making sure that I keep my house in order week in and week out is so important to being able to be as prepared as possible for each weekend.
Yeah, I think for me, it's just shocking because usually when you associate, all that travel and all of that work that has to get done, you're going to be mentally fatigued. And in your sport, like you said with the simulator, you need to be so sharp because there is no reset button. You're in a car going around the track, hundreds of miles per hour. So you need to be very, very mentally sharp and on point. You talked about you found kind of a good schedule and a good regimen that works for you. What does that kind of look like for you, and how do you stay so mentally sharp throughout all of the travel and all of the work over the course of the season?
Yeah, I think ideally, we race on typically Saturday afternoons, and we'll fly home right after the race, and you spend Sunday just enjoying your Sunday, right? I mean, just taking a day, decompressing, and actually just turned 25, and so doing, it's all the same stuff, hanging out with my buddies and having a good time, whether we're on the lake or go golfing, whatever it is. And then Monday, usually the first thing I do is wake up and go hit the gym, and our bodies get. I mentioned turning 25. I feel like I'm like 55. I usually spend most of Monday morning just working through and rolling out and doing kind of a stretching routine that I have to make sure that I kind of decompress my body a little bit, just because, sitting in those race cars and dealing with all those G-forces for 3 hours every Saturday takes a toll. And so, yeah, like I said, first Monday morning I usually spend just working out and kind of hitting the reset button, all the fatigue that my body's gone through. And then Monday afternoon, either go to the race shop, typically try and go to the race shop Monday afternoon for a little bit. And then it's laundry and dishes and all the getting my house back to a good spot. Every once in a while, being at the racetrack stops, and it's like, okay, I gotta do laundry.
All the boring
and then,
stuff.
like I said, yeah, exactly. And then from there, Tuesday, we have a team meeting to talk about the weekend before. So every Tuesday afternoon, everybody on our race team at Roush Fenway get together, and we really break down the weekend, the good, the bad, the ugly, and figure out how as a whole team we can get better. Pretty much after Tuesday afternoon, you stop thinking about what happened the weekend before. Whether you won the race or you finished dead last, it's time to put it to bed. It doesn't matter how you ran, because that next weekend is obviously the most important thing. So as soon as that meeting closes the door, I walk over and get with my crew chief, and I say, okay, what do we got for this weekend? And we talk about setups and game plans. And then Wednesday is usually a day where if I am going to do simulator work, spend about half a day Wednesday doing that, and gym every day. So Tuesday's meetings and gym, and Wednesday is simulator and gym, and then Thursday is like a nice little day off. It's packing, getting ready for the weekend ahead. If I can find the time to go play around the golf or just whatever, go on the lake, whatever I can. Me and my buddies all like to surf a lot and wake surf, and so we'll do that. Just whatever we can do to just enjoy ourselves and really kind of clear our head before the race weekend starts. I think we all as young guys, we feel there's a lot of pressure on us to perform, and so we take that very seriously. So it's nice to just go clear the head and get to a really good mental spot before we get the weekend started.
So Ryan, you've talked about sort of where your career is now, having just turned 25, middle of the season, but I want to go back to the start of your racing career. So if you can, fill our listeners in on when that all started. I understand you grew up around racing, your father, Mark, who was a former NASCAR driver as well, but talk to us how you found racing as kind of a passion and when this all started.
Yeah, like you said, my dad raced, and so it was something that just from the time I can remember, racing was in my life. My dad, he it was the same thing, either me and my brother were at the racetrack watching him, or we were at my grandma's house on the weekend while my dad was at the racetrack, and I loved it. It was just so cool, and I was definitely a very energetic child and felt like I was just constantly needing to know what's going on and being able to, run around, and just was always very, just like I said, an energetic child. And then, but when the race started and I was able to go to watch my dad, it was like I didn't care. Like, I mean, I could sit there for 3.5 hours and just watch my dad make laps and study it. And I think those are some of my earliest memories around racing, is just watching my dad race and trying to figure it out and trying to understand what was going on. Then when I was old enough, I got my first go-kart. I was 4 years old, which sounds awfully young, but it seems like everyone in sports nowadays, you're starting as young as possible. And so I started racing go-karts, and from the time I sat in that go-kart, I remember growing up, you get asked a lot in school, what do you want to do when you grow up? I never wavered. It was always a NASCAR driver, not just a race car driver. I mean, there's obviously a lot of forms of racing. It was, I want to be a NASCAR driver. And I grew up with that and went through all of school with that, through high school. And then obviously, if I wasn't racing go-karts that whole time, you're kind of climbing the ladder just like you would in any other sport. You're getting into, for us, it's heavier, faster cars that they don't drive as good. Faster being, one of the key words. Just every time you get into the next class or the next, the tougher division, it's always a faster racer. You're going faster and faster and faster. And so, by the time I was 17 years old, I was racing full-size stock cars, doing 140 miles an hour, 130 miles an hour at my local short track, which is really cool. I think I had a lot of, I grew up in California, so racing wasn't overly popular, but I had a good group of friends that all loved to go to the racetrack. Actually, when we would get done with high school, that was the first thing we did. We'd make sure our homework got done. So mom and dad would let me race, and then it was go work on race cars. And those were some of the coolest times, because I felt like it wasn't just driving race cars. It was figuring out how to work on them and hanging out with my buddies. And then from there, obviously, I moved back to North Carolina when I was 17 years old. North Carolina is kind of the hub. So obviously, like I said, where I'm still at today. And I was so fortunate to, I think a lot of people can race to that level when they're 17 or 18. And then I got a few opportunities to race in NASCAR and race in the Xfinity Series. I got a 5-race deal with Roush Fenway. Did pretty well in those 5 races, and they signed me and partnered up with Lilly Diabetes, which we can talk more about in a minute. But once we partnered up with Roush Fenway and Lilly Diabetes, that's really what gave me the opportunity to start racing full time at one of the motorsports highest levels.
So what was that process like? I mean, you talked about having never wavered as a kid, flat out, I want to be a NASCAR driver. That's it. That's what I want to focus on. To actually see that kind of come to fruition, what were your feelings at that time? It sounds like it was just a long time coming, ever since the age of 4, working on that goal. But having that initial 5-race contract, what was that feeling like when you kind of realized this dream was coming to pass as reality?
I mean, it's so hard to put in words. And I think that anyone who's you grow up and I want to be a NASCAR driver. And I think people are like, oh, that's cool that you want to do that. But no one ever really takes it serious. I think for a lot of reasons, you're so young that no one really knows if you're any good at it, right? And then also, too, even if you are really good at it, it's no different than any other professional sport. The odds, there's so many unbelievably talented individuals at whatever sport that don't make it, that don't get to be a professional football, soccer, NASCAR, hockey, et cetera. As you get older, as I got older and got, in my teens, and obviously a lot of talks with my parents, and they explained to me, hey, you're choosing a really tough road, and this may not work out, and you have to mentally prepare yourself that you're willing to give everything you have, and you're willing to dedicate your life to this, and you're dedicating your life to something that there's a good chance that you won't reach the level you want to. That doesn't mean that you believe that. That just means that is you recognize that's a real possibility. And my dad always gave me a great perspective on it, and it was just, hey, you have to truly believe that you have the talent to be one of the best and that you're going to make it, but also know the risk. Also, too, you never know what's going to happen driving a race car every weekend. You get hurt and never drive a race car like that, just like any other sport. It taught me a lot throughout that time about commitment and dedication, and it's helped me not just in my professional and my racing career, but in other endeavors in my life that I want, just, about, like I said, that commitment and dedication it takes.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important message, because at the end of the day, it's you choose the direction of your life. And like you said, it can be scary to kind of put all your eggs in that one basket. But if that's your passion, you have to go after it. And by all accounts, your career was really accelerating throughout those teen years. We talked about your chance getting a shot at NASCAR, and then kind of at a point where you're fully in on this dream, you get a diagnosis in 2011. And doctors didn't think you'd be able to continue racing with type 1 diabetes. What was sort of your gut reaction to that news, having just been dealt a hand that by a lot of accounts and from a lot of different doctors, having them just say, you know what, Ryan, this career isn't going to work out with type 1 diabetes?
It was a lot of confusion. I didn't know what type 1 diabetes was. I didn't know anyone that had. I didn't have any experience with it. It wasn't like I could even argue with the doctor. I mean, I just had no knowledge of it. And, you know, they flat out told me, you're never going to race again. You know, my first question when I got diagnosed was, how's this going to affect my racing? And they just said, no, that's, you know, the words were, you have to focus on living a normal life. And when you tell a kid who they're, you know, I was 17 at the time, you know, I've been racing since I was 4. So, I mean, 13 years of my life, of my 17 years have been under the belief that I was going to drive race cars. And so, you know, when they say a normal life, that doesn't make sense to me, because I'm like, I don't know what a normal life is outside of racing and trying to be a professional race car driver. It was devastating, you know, and it was, you take a 17-year-old and you give them a disease they had no choice. You know, they didn't do anything to get that. You know, they didn't, there's no responsibility to be given there as to why they now have to manage type 1 diabetes. That's tough. That's a tough pill to swallow, tough to get your arms around. So it was really tough, and it was at a time in my life where I thought that, you know, I was winning races on the West Coast, getting ready to move back to North Carolina at 17. I was moving out there on my own nonetheless. So, like, I'm getting ready to, you know, I mean, every 17-year-old, right? Like, you can't wait. Like, it's spreading your wings, you're flying, you're getting out of the parents' house. And it was a really exciting time in my life for so many reasons, professionally and personally. And then that stopped. That was over. And, you know, I didn't know what was next. It was, you know, everything that I looked forward to in life was put on hold. And, you know, it was, but I mean, I think the biggest thing that I look back on that is in those trying moments and in those tough times, I realized how great both my parents were. I mean, they're so supportive, you know, and I think that, you know, a lot of times at 17 years old, you can take for granted what you have. Certainly, I mean, my parents always had a good relationship. I was really close. I always knew that I loved my parents, but when that all went down, I realized, you know, how fortunate I was. And we really, you know, pulled together throughout that time. And, you know, over those next couple months, it was really trying, but we got through it together.
I think you kind of highlighted two really common threads that I've heard from other diabetic athletes. Number one is support networks, and I want to return to that topic in a little bit here, because I think there's obviously a lot of overlap between a diabetes support network and then your support network as a NASCAR driver with your pit crew. But I wanted to go back to that initial feeling, and again, I think this is another commonality. It's really not what most people think when they think, you know, what was your gut reaction to a diagnosis? Like, how angry were you, or frustrated, or scared? It's more just like, what is this thing? I don't even know. So I wanted to get your take on how did you kind of transition out of that. I've talked to a lot of other athletes who said my kind of coping mechanism was that I just dived in and I did as much research as possible to try to figure out how I could kind of beat this thing and how I could regain control of my life. But how did you take that first step back? I read that you were back on the racetrack within 4 months. That's incredibly impressive considering you were dealt a diagnosis at a really young age. Talk about how you were able to take those starting steps to get back to where you wanted to be on the racetrack.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail right on the head. It was diving myself into research. Like any athlete, they've been so vested in their craft, their sport, that when that stops, most athletes are pretty compulsive in a way that, you know, they are all in, you know, and that's what makes them great. And I don't think it was any different for myself, that I was so all in that I all of a sudden had this kind of compulsiveness, and I just said, you know what, I'm just going to go understand what this is, at least understand why it's holding me back. From there, it was a lot of research and just, you know, reading what diabetes is and understanding it and understanding, you know, the just ins and outs of it. And then, you know, that was like, you know what, let me read about athletes with diabetes, because it's 2011. There's someone out there doing something with diabetes. That's when I started to, you know, come across all these amazing and super inspirational stories. That's when things, I think, started to kind of turn the page for me. I didn't come across any NASCAR drivers, and so there wasn't that element where I was like, oh, cool, I get to do this. You know what I mean? Here's a story right here. I didn't find that one thing that I can point to where I'm like, oh, it's all good now. But I started to quit being so negative, I guess. It was like, you know what? There's all these people doing amazing things. It just gave me that little bit of hope that I needed to just keep digging. And, you know, from there, through all that research and through reading all these stories, I read about an endocrinologist, diabetes specialist that worked with several athletes. I grew up in Bakersfield, California, about 2 hours north of LA, and sure, her practice is in Los Angeles. And so we reached out, and it was multiple phone calls, but finally, after she heard my story, just how basically how much I needed to get in to see her, she cleared a spot and got me in. She had a huge waiting list, and she got me in, and I just remember going in there and, still pretty dejected and still pretty, for the first time in my life, I was shy. Like I was just, kind of timid, and I'd never been that way in my life until dealing with this. And I went in to see her, and I think she probably recognized that, and she was like, are you going to listen to me? Are you going to do everything I tell you to do? Are you going to take this very seriously? And I was like, yes. And she's like, okay, we're going to get you back into a race car. And I hadn't been in there. I had been talking to her for 5 minutes or 10 minutes when she said that. And I think that was when it was like, a weight was lifted off my shoulders. I didn't know how. I didn't know how much my life was going to change. I didn't know everything I was going to have to do to manage diabetes, while racing. I didn't know all that yet. But as long as I had someone there to tell me I could do it, that's all I need. That's all I needed to know to be, back in 110% and to say this isn't going to stop me. And I think right there is when I realized, it changed so much more than just me thinking I get back in a race car. It changed my whole mindset towards this disease.
Talk about what that moment was like. You've had this kind of dream and passion taken away from you, and then go through the process of researching these other athletes, and then you get that final validation that we're gonna make this thing work. Was that immediately inspiring, motivating to you? Were you fired up to get back in the car? What was that moment like for you?
I think that it was. I was really excited, but I think it was, because that whole experience, first time meeting Ann and going through all that and so many emotions. But I think it was. Because we immediately went to work. It wasn't, I was there for probably 3 hours, and it was getting me on CGM. That day, we're going to get you on a CGM. We're going to change, obviously, my whole kind of medication regimen, how, my insulin regimen got me in. I was working with a nutritionist that day. It was kind of a whirlwind, that whole experience. And so, to be honest with you, I had so many different emotions going on throughout that afternoon that it's hard to tell you one thing, but I think the underlier of it all was just I was so relieved. It was a weight lifted off my shoulders and felt like I could be myself again, and I could hope for things again. And I think that that's a big part of what inspired me not only to continue racing. Obviously, I didn't need a whole lot of help with that because I was so in love with the sport. But it's what inspired me to want to make a difference. When I left the doctor's office that day, I knew that I wanted, once I got back in a race car, I wanted to use the racing platform, and I wanted to use my story and everything that I had went through over those first couple months of being diagnosed to tell people that were going through the same thing, because I knew there was people out there going through the same things. There's people being told they can't when they absolutely can. That's when all that changed. I think that those were some of the things that I look back at and know that I left that afternoon with, that I didn't walk in with.
So Ryan, we talk a lot on the podcast about utilizing support networks, and you certainly talked about leaning on your parents during this time, leaning on certain endocrinologists. Having grown up around pit crews and sort of the teamwork associated with competitive racing, what was the transition like to utilizing your diabetes support network? I think sometimes, at least in my own life as a diabetic athlete, when you have trainers trying to help out, sometimes you try to take on the burden of diabetes alone, and it can be a process to open up and fully leverage those people. What was the transition like to starting to utilize your diabetes support network to its fullest extent? And were there similarities and differences that you could see between that support network and the support network of, say, a pit crew?
Yeah, absolutely. The people, I talked when I was first diagnosed, your diabetes support network starts right away. It's the first person you talk to after you're diagnosed. And that was obviously for me, my mom and dad. And then, you talk about and my doctor, and you talk, and so, for me, it was Lilly Diabetes did a really cool video series a while back where they drew all these parallels about, my pit crew and then my diabetes pit crew. And I think it's really interesting because it puts in perspective for me how important all these people are, because it doesn't work. Like, my diabetes management doesn't work, just like my race team doesn't work without each individual. And it's so important, my endocrinologist, my doctor, and she's the crew chief, she's the one making, helping make all the decisions. She's the one giving me all the information I need. She's the one coming up with a game plan. And then, I'm the driver. I'm the person who lives with diabetes. I'm the person who takes it home. And I'm the one who has to, just like when the race starts, I get in the race car, and everything we've done, all the setup, all the engineering, everything we've done to that point rests on me. Just like when I go home and I have all the information, I have all the tools and resources, and I'm the one giving myself the insulin injections. I'm the one carb counting. I'm the one who actually has to implement all that. And so there's a ton of similarities, and your diabetes support network is just key. It's key to your success in your personal life. It's it's just working with you. I've talked a lot about it, and people will ask me all the time, like, what's the advice you can give, and what do you have for your success? Like, what helps you? It's 100,000% working with my doctor and managing my diabetes to the best of my ability, because that's the cornerstone to all of it. I mean, we all know how tough anyone who's been affected by type 1 diabetes, whether it's you living with it or you see a loved one living with it, you know how tough it is, and you know how hard the lows and highs, literally and figuratively, are. And if you're not on top of that and you're not managing it, obviously there's gonna be bad days. I mean, I have plenty. I had a roller coaster yesterday with my blood sugar, and those days are tough. But day in and day out, strive to be the best at it that I can be, and do the best job I can, and that makes a huge difference.
So I think one of the most sort of uplifting and exciting parts about diabetes treatment and management right now, in addition to these support networks of people, is the technology that we have out today. Can you talk a little bit about your current management system? And I've heard that you've kind of have some cool custom setups with like a dashboard CGM, but what are sort of some of the technologies that you're leaning on right now to help you with your diabetes management?
Like you said, the technology side of diabetes has changed the way that we live with this disease. And I've only lived with it. I mean, I say only, but like I lived with type 1 diabetes for 7 years now. And there's people obviously that have lived for 40 years with it, 50 years with it, and or more. But even in my 7 years with diabetes, I've seen technology change infinitely. I mean, I've used a CGM, I've used a Dexcom since the first time I went and saw Ann Peters, and that was a key part to me getting in the race car was having a CGM on in my race car so I can know what my blood sugar is at all times, and to see how much the accuracy has improved. To see now that you don't even. I mean, you don't have to finger prick anymore. I mean, that is unbelievable. My fingertips are ecstatic about that. And I also use an app called My Sugar to help log on my blood sugars, and they communicate, and like it's just crazy to see all that. And then obviously, I still use pens, insulin pens, and the main reason for that is that it gets so hot in the race car. I mean, in Chicago a couple weeks ago, it was over 155 degrees in the car. So obviously keeping insulin at those temperatures is not that's not realistic. So rather than change delivery methods throughout the week, consistency is so important for what I do. So I just use a pen. I use a pen all the time. But I'm still aware and know how much the pump technology has changed and how much it's changed people's lives. And so not just what I use, but across the board, even the stuff that I don't use, I know it's making a huge difference in people's lives that live with diabetes. But you talk about the uniqueness of me having a CGM on my dash, and we built a really cool bracket that I actually just slide my receiver, my standard CGM receiver, into this bracket on the dash, and I'll connect to all my gauges. That with water temperature, oil pressure, voltage, fuel pressure, et cetera, et cetera. So I have to watch for those anyway. So watching my blood sugar is just an extra gauge. But they did Dexcom basically made one to where I can leave the backlight lit up, so I don't have to reach up and push the button. It stays lit next to all my gauges, which obviously being able to keep both hands on the wheel at all times makes it a nice little difference.
Equipped with all this technology, equipped with a great support network, you're going into race day, you're set to go. Walk us through what a race day is actually like. What's the mindset going in, and God forbid an issue does arise with your blood sugar as you're racing, sort of how do you handle that, and how does the team adapt to a blood sugar being too high or too low during a race?
Yeah, it's funny. I've talked a lot about this, and me and my friend Connor Daly, who's actually going to be my teammates this weekend at Road America for the first time. He's an IndyCar driver. He's had type 1 diabetes, and I've been racing IndyCar for a number of years now, and we've talked so much about this, not with each other, obviously, and then also we've done a lot of media talking about this, and our race day regimen is really strict. But our regimen for managing diabetes starts, I'm going through things today that'll make a difference, when you're talking about diet, exercise, gym, and obviously, my bolusing and basals and all that, everything I do today is going to make a difference come race day, and that's going to play a key role in making sure that I don't have a diabetes-related incident while I'm on the racetrack. But with that being said, we obviously all plan for the worst, hope for the best. And so my doctor and I both worked really hard on coming up with a system. And so obviously we have a drink inside the car and have a drink inside my truck if I'm driving down the road and I have low blood sugar. So obviously I have a drink to treat a low blood sugar if need be inside the race car. And so that's the first thing that, I think is pretty standard. And then also, too, one thing that is not standard, that is unique, and if you look at my fire suit, obviously you're going to see Lilly Diabetes, you're going to see drivedown1c.com on the fire suit, you're going to see all the sponsors, you're going to see red and white, but then you're going to see a yellow and red target on the left leg of my fire suit. It stands out a lot, and no driver has a bullseye on their fire suit, but that's actually to indicate where I would need an insulin injection during a race if my blood sugar is too high. And so we have a guy trained on our pit crew to go over the wall, and we could get 4 tires, fuel, and insulin if need be in the middle of a race. And I've never had to do that. It's more of a safety net. It's 100% a safety net, but we practiced it. We know what to do in that situation. And we have 2-way radios that I can communicate that to my team if I need that. And so, that's probably the most unique thing in our sport as far as someone, a system in place to help me because I have diabetes.
My understanding is that some of these races are, multiple hour events where you, like we talked about earlier, have to be really turned on mentally. Is it common to not kind of like refuel with a snack or something like that at some point during the race? Because it sounds like you're trying to really avoid taking on any insulin during the race. It is. I think a lot of guys do that, where they will eat a snack, or eat something throughout the race to help, replenish, carbohydrates and proteins and stuff. Mm-hmm. But, I think that I have to really make sure that I do a good job with my nutrition before the race, and that was the main thing that me and my doctor wanted to make sure is that, we didn't want me to just go compete. We wanted me to contend and win races and be one of the best, and that takes, training like an athlete, eating like an athlete, doing everything that an athlete does. And obviously, you come to, a point where you get some conflict, obviously managing diabetes and like you said, you're an athlete. And so, how tough it can be, carbohydrates and diabetes don't always mix well. And carbohydrates are our energy source. And so, are a big part of our energy source. Yeah. It certainly is tough. And that's not to say that I don't, because I do have that drink and I will drink, I will have some of that drink throughout the race, but it's just got to be, it can't be too much because I'm not planning on taking any insulin throughout the race. But obviously before the race, when I still can take insulin, I carb up, eat lean proteins and lots of vegetables and healthy fats, stuff like that are gonna give me the energy that I need to get through that race. The pre-race, not just pre-race meal, but the night before, a couple days before, making sure that I am, I have the nutrients that I need to be, not just get through the race, but to be a contender is, that's one of the biggest parts of it. I think a big part about being a diabetic athlete is being aware of what you can control. And then, like you said, you're planning for the worst and hoping for the best. In my football career, it was like, I can control what I can control right up until about the first whistle. And then it's, everything that I've done in the preceding week that will hopefully empower me to be able to go out and perform at a high level. But I think we touched on an important note earlier about even for the most dialed-in diabetic athlete, there are going to be some highs and lows. And I wanted to ask you, Ryan, if you could send out a message to a diabetic that's struggling out there right now, perhaps they were just diagnosed, or perhaps they're just going through a particularly rough patch in their diabetes treatment, what would your message be to that person and why? I think, the first thing I would say, and we've talked about it, is lean on the people around you. And for me, that was a lot my parents and a lot my doctor. So I talked about it before, when I was doing the research. Knowledge is so empowering, especially for people living with diabetes. Once you feel like you understand what's going on, it's so empowering. And so just try and take control of the disease. I think that once even though a lot of days that you feel like you have control over your diabetes and you feel like you know exactly what to do, and
nothing goes right, just try your best to take control of your diabetes, and working with your doctor can be so crucial to doing that. But then also too, and I know this is simple and cliche and all that, but just don't give up. I was, obviously told to give up, and there's a lot of days, that you feel like you want to. It's just not. This is so difficult, and this is just unbelievably hard. And so it does seem like giving up would be a lot easier, but that's obviously that's not going to get you to where, that's not going to get you to achieve your dreams and goals. And so work, as hard as you can. And as people living with diabetes and as athletes living with diabetes, we're probably going to have to work a little harder than everyone else, but that's okay. When you achieve your goal, and I know, for me, it all kind of came to a peak when I won at Daytona in the NASCAR Xfinity Series for the first time. And that was like, it was a culmination of every single thing that I went through. It was like, man, this was worth it. This was worth all the, sleepless nights and all the difficult times, the tears, the everything. If you can, my message is that if you can do your absolute best at every and work hard, then I can promise you that those efforts will be paid off.
I think on that topic of support and not giving up, and we talked about how you felt the urge to kind of give back to the diabetic community after you were given the news that, hey, we're going to get you back in a race car after your diagnosis. You personally have started an initiative called Ryan's Mission. Would you talk to us a little bit about what that experience was like and what some of your experiences have been in trying to serve the broader diabetic community?
Yeah, I talked about, when I was at my doctor's office and I was, for the first time, felt empowered to go chase my dreams again, that I wanted to give back. And, it started just with, I just want to put up like a website and just share my story. Nothing crazy, just, here's what happened to me, and hopefully some people can find some, inspiration in it and find some light in my story. So we put it up and we called it Ryan's Mission. Obviously it was just Ryan's mission was to tell my story and to hopefully help some other people. And we got an amazing response to it. I wasn't racing in NASCAR at the time. I was just racing developmental series, and so I didn't have a following. I didn't have fans or anything, but I had people that were reading this and sharing it on Facebook and stuff. And I had people reaching out to me and wanting to kind of meet me, and kids, they wanted me, parents wanted me to tell their kids the story. And I started working with JDRF and ADA and all the different organizations that obviously surround diabetes, and that was kind of how it was all born. And so I never thought that it would grow into what it is today. And certainly once I partnered up with Lilly Diabetes, and obviously once I got into NASCAR, the platform and the scale grew so much, and we were able to do so much more. Like I said, we're on a plane every weekend going to a different market. We try to use that, whether it's children's hospitals, diabetes summer camps, endocrinologist office visits, or just as simple as there's a fan at the track that, they're there with their parents, and they're just race fans, and they've heard my story, and they just want to meet me. And so just go take 15 minutes out of the day to go hang out with a kid who lives with diabetes. And those moments, those impacts are what, they far outweigh what I get to do, as far as strapping in a race car. That's cool and all, but after being diagnosed and after going through what I've gone through, that those 5 or 10 minutes I get to spend with a kid who lives with diabetes that finds inspiration in my story, those are what I think about, and what I will think about when my career is all said and done.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think what's particularly unique about your story is to have that drive to give back at such a young age. I think a common thread, again, with diabetics is we're dealing with a chronic disease that can be really invisible if you want it to be. So as an athlete, when you have that platform, it almost takes the mindset that you need to be active and demonstrative with your treatment to show people that, like, hey, I am dealing with this chronic illness. Because if you went through, just a normal day doing injections here and there, maybe you go to the bathroom to do an injection, people might not know that you're a diabetic. So I experienced the same thing in football. Even up to my senior year, I was doing injections, and guys would come up to me that I'd been playing with for 4 years and say, what are you doing? And I would say, I'm a diabetic. And they say, I didn't know that. We all, as diabetics, bear an obligation to be active in terms of, how we manage our disease, so that we can try to be an inspiration for others, because we all have a platform, whether we know it or not, to some extent. So I think what you're doing with Ryan's Mission is awesome. we wish you the best. You go forward and continue with the service of the broader diabetic community. So, Ryan, what's next? We want to know, what are your future goals as not only as a NASCAR driver, but as a diabetic?
Yeah, obviously, as an athlete, and I want to be the best race car driver I can be. I want to win more races. I want to win championships, and I just want to continue to be the best race car driver I can be, and continue to we all get better at whatever we're doing every time. Every day we work at it, we get a little better, and so just continue that and try and continue to get to the next level, which is obviously the Cup Series in NASCAR, and just continue my work, and I've been so fortunate to be partnered up with Lilly Diabetes, who's, been extreme, mirrored my passion in making an impact, and continue to work with them and continue to find new ways to make that impact. And obviously that's going to be something that doesn't go away regardless of where my career goes. If I stopped racing tomorrow, it would just give me that much more time to invest in making that difference. And so I don't know exactly what's next there. And I think that, for today, it's just continue what I'm doing, hopefully being able to continue to find new ways and more meaningful ways to make that impact. Yeah, I think it's been an amazing 7 years, especially over the last 5 years when, racing professionally and racing full time. I've been able to obviously achieve a lot of my goals and dreams. But like I said earlier, what's been more meaningful than that has been to see the impact that this program has meant made in people's lives, but to see how much it meant to so many people, it just motivates me that much more to keep going and to continue to make a bigger difference.
It's amazing stuff. It's awesome work. Well, Ryan, we will let you go. We'll be looking for you out on the racetrack. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. My name is Ryan Reed. I have type 1 diabetes, and I have a game plan.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Game Plan T1D podcast. For related content, please visit www.gameplant1d.com or follow us on social media @GamePlanT1D. Find your game plan.